evening. You're watching Primetime Debate. Earlier this week, the Reserve Bank of India released a set of fresh guidelines to deal with bad loans or NPAs. This new set of rules are more stringent and would give very little space to defaulting companies from getting fresh credit while not repaying their loans. Earlier schemes like the SDR, that is the Strategic Debt Restructuring, and CDR, Corporate Debt Restructuring, have been scrapped. These schemes were a sort of last chance or halfway house that defaulting companies had before they were shut down. So stressed assets now above 5 crore rupees will be identified immediately and reported weekly. The process of resolution will also begin immediately. A number of analysts have said that while there may be some short-term pain, in the long term, these new rules will help clean up the system. But can the banking system in its current state withstand these new stricter rules? To speak on this, I'm joined this evening by former RBI Deputy Governor K.C. Chakravarti and Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, Associate Professor of Finance at ISB. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Mr. Chakravarti, what is your view on what these new guidelines have come in as? Is it the right time?
Yeah, I think, you see, time is definitely right, because you see, if time is not right, I will say it is delayed too much. So that's why the time has to be said right. Only thing that if you say time is not right, it is delayed. Look, there is nothing wrong in the circular. Principles are very well read. First thing, if somebody is sick, it has to be identified as quickly as possible. Then immediately start taking the action. If within the organization you are not able to take action, if you need to sacrifice, if you want to change the ownership, go to the resolution council as quickly as possible so that entire thing is resolved as quickly. I don't think anybody is going to object to that. But the devil lies in the implementation. Is our system ready? You can send a particular proposal to the resolution council. Will be able to resolve it. And if these are not resolved, the only thing what will happen, that banks will be making provision, borrowers will not get the credit, and what will happen to the system, that we have to look into that. Yes, over a period of time, system will get adjusted to these things, and my view is that it will be good for the system. But I have one more objection from the philosophical point of view. When you are saying, you are talking of accounts of more than 20 billion, accounts of 1 billion. I think when you are framing the rule should be made applicable to everybody. In fact, in any democratic society, rule is applicable, law is applicable more forcefully for the smaller people, poorer people. It is only rich and privileged they escape the law. But when you prepare a law and say that it will be not applicable to MSME, it will not happen to the natural calamities, I have a problem. And I think that is where we are distorting the system. If this is the rule, this should be made applicable to everybody. Yes, you subsidize the people at this stage of implementation, I have no problem. But you cannot say that rule will be not applicable to some other people, and especially those who are underprivileged. It never happened in a democratic system. And you frame a rule and you say that rule will be not applicable to the weaker people. On the contrary, it happens just the opposite.
Mr. Subramanian, here Mr. K.C. Chakravarti seems to be saying that these rules are not strict enough. They should be actually applied across the board. But I just want to go back to where some of the genesis of the current situation is. When we were in a situation where clearances weren't coming through, there were a lot of intensive sectors which turned into NPAs because what was supposed to happen in timeline in terms of government policy did not take place. Some could argue there were factors which were beyond the control of some of these debtors. How does that sit in with the current guidelines?
So let me just first start by mentioning that, what the Reserve Bank has done is something that was long overdue. I want to remind our viewers about the report that the PGNI committee had written. This was in May 2014. At that time itself, we had flagged off the issue of regulatory forbearance, possible regulatory forbearance, and the extent of non-performing assets actually that was sitting in the books of the banks, and which were being called basically euphemistically restructured assets. And we had pointed out that the market at that time was actually treating the restructured assets as non-performing assets itself. The second point that I want to actually make is, for instance, the circular talks about the use of the CLIC, which is a database of large borrowers. This is something which is actually absolutely required. We had while working on the committee's work, we had actually found that there are several instances of information not being shared among banks about the same borrower, and thereby the same borrower getting multiple loans actually when the borrower may not be deserving of that. So I think these are just definitely overdue, which should have been done. Now to come to your main question about whether this is strict or not, and the fact that some of these actually might have been because of bad luck. So let me point out, we have to understand how an equity contract is structured. When you have promoters or the founders of the firm, they actually are equity holders. Now, they do enjoy the benefits when luck goes their way, right? If, for instance, it's an oil firm and let's say oil price moves up, for which they have nothing to do with, they actually enjoy the benefits that come from the same. So the counter that therefore is that if things don't go their way, that is part of the risk that they're taking and the reward that they get actually. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. Therefore, I would actually advocate that whether the default happens because of reasons that are beyond the borrower's control, or the default happens because of reasons that are actually within his control. The fact is, an equity contract means that if you don't repay, you have to actually cede control to the creditor. That is what the essence of a contract is, and therefore that is something that has to be upheld. If we go back, you have to remember that in India, for instance, a lot of the borrowers enjoy what is called a super equity, which is that they actually get to keep the gains when things go their way, even if they are just lucky. But at the same time, when things don't go their way, they actually, still continue to be in control, which was what it was, till recently. I think that is something that has to change. I must just add one other aspect. Some of my research actually has been doing on willful defaulters. And what is important actually is that willful defaulters, for instance, happens on a systematic basis actually, and it is not something that happens actually overnight. There are a set of signals that crop out, which actually are oftentimes are not heeded to. So this is something which actually is a step in the right direction. You need this kind of change cannot happen without some pain. That pain has to be borne, but right now the banking system, the kind of stress it is in, it needs medicine that actually will definitely work. It may be painful, but that is
no, absolutely. And let me make it clear, I'm not here suggesting that willful defaulters should get any special sympathy, not at all. My question, very simply, Mr. Chakravarti, is that the banking system needs medicine right now. That's why we've called the show Bitter Pill. Is the state of the banking system strong enough to withstand this level or this dosage of medication, if I may take that analogy forward? And what is the impact it will have over the next few months and perhaps years?
You see, look, if you are weak, if you are sick, you cannot say, I will not give the strong doses of medicine. All you have to give more healthier diet. So that is what the banks require. They require capital infusion. But you cannot avoid taking these steps. You need to infuse the more capital in the banks and make the system clean and make it uniformly applicable to everybody. That's my view. There is nothing wrong in the guidelines to say that I am sick, so I am not capable enough taking the strong dose medicine. It does not work. It does not save the person.
Okay, let's talk a bit about impact, Mr. Chakravarti. How do you see this impacting the industry over the next few weeks?
I will not. I say that how it will be implemented. Impact will be on the basis of the implementation. If it is implemented, people will be not able to do the business unless they bring the equity. people who have not assessed the risk properly, they should not come forward for doing the business. Your appraisal method, risk management system, this will be more stringent in made applicable. So all what I'm saying, good borrowers will get the credit. Borrowers who are not good, as per the proper appraisal of the loan application, they will not get the credit. And for that, borrowers who are having the equity support, they will be preferred by the banking system.
Okay, Mr. Subramaniam wanted to come in. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I want to point out that this comment about is the banking system ready? I've been hearing this comment since 2014. In fact, even before. It is like I'm going to give you a parallel where have a heart patient actually who's been diagnosed with heart problem, and then we basically keep saying that is the patient ready for a bypass? He needs a bypass, and we've been saying no, he's not ready, and actually we keep putting band-aid over it, and the problem basically becomes from a single bypass, now we are actually at a stage of a quadruple bypass, and there is no way we can actually escape this. So this the fact is, across whether you actually look at any country, right, a banking crisis, the sooner it is nipped in the bud, the less the pain. And we've already procrastinated and we've dragged our feet based on this logic, that is the banking sector ready, for almost 4 years. And I think in my opinion, actually enough is enough. Right now, actually the banking sector needs that bitter pill and should be administered right away.
The dangerous thing about this medical analogy is that it's not like there've never been cases where a patient was overdosed more than they could take. But anyway, I'm not going there, Mr. Subramaniam. I'm going to ask you what happens to fledgling industries like the startup sector, which is already struggling in some bits. Mr. Chakravarti spoke about if they are good, they deserve to get credit. If they're bad, they deserve not to. I just come back to the point that is it that easy to distinguish why someone defaults on their payment? Is it as simple as good and bad? Is it that black and white?
So this is where actually, if you look at world over, right, there is a lot of use of analytical models to try and understand, to be able to predict, what kind of, early warning signals on default. And that is where I think the, the database that has been put together, the CRILIC database, if analytics are used to try and actually understand that, nobody is claiming here that this is actually an easy job. It's a difficult job. It's a job that experts need to actually, get engaged in, definitely, but it is not impossible. Like firms actually and banks do this lending across the world. If you see crises, banking crises actually do not happen very frequently. Those happen only when the kind of lending mechanisms that actually should be used are not used. You have irrational exuberance combined with a macroeconomic shock. So this is definitely possible. Distinguishing between a good and a bad borrower, that is the essence of the business of banking. And when banks actually do their job well, that is precisely what they're supposed to do. And if the mechanisms are actually in place, it's not really rocket science. Actually, it can be done together with the use of wisdom and combined with actually good analytics. So this is not such a difficult thing. It's just that the right balance needs to be mixed. And in fact, let me point out actually the fact that what has been advocated now is actually for loans above a certain threshold limit is something which actually spares the smaller borrowers. Typically, smaller borrowers actually are not the ones that indulge in willful defaulting. If you go and look at the data, the willful default actually is concentrated on the large borrowers. So I think small borrowers will continue to actually get credit as long as they have projects that deserve it.
So that's the point Mr. Chakravarti also made, that it should have been uniform across the board. But yeah, 5 CR onwards is where those stringent rules set in. Thank you so much, Dr. Chakravarti and Mr. Subramaniam, for joining us this evening on the first of the Primetime Debates.